Welcome, everybody, to the Kick Sugar Summit. I'm here today with Dr. Robert Lustig, and probably he doesn't need an introduction, but in case you're new, here is a short bio of Dr. Lustig. He is an MD, and he specialized in pediatric endocrinology. He's a professor emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco. He is the author of many books, three of which I'll mention. One is called Fat Chance. The other is called Hacking of the American Mind. And his most recent book, which is just in the background there, is called Metabolical. And Dr. Lustig sort of burst into onto the world stage when he did a lecture about sugar and fructose in particular through a YouTube video that 6 years ago or 7 years ago when I first started this summit, I think there was less than 50,000 views. Is that possible?
There were 800,000 views within a year.
Okay.
But now, for reasons that are still unclear to me, there are more than 21 million views.
Right. And okay, so maybe it was under a million or something, and it was still a huge number. But yeah, I've just watched it go explosive. And so you've kind of become this doctor that we turn to for credibility for those of us that are working in this space as, not doctors, we don't have all the credentials that you have and some of the clout you have. So you've been really kind of a leader, helping us sort of feel like we're not just going to be patted on the head. Oh, that's very nice. Oh, right. Sugars, come on. It's just a cookie kind of thing. So what I'd love to do is chat just very briefly about how you became this really leading medical doctor in this space, this conversation around sugar and fructose and the malfunctioning of our food culture, and a bit about maybe if you had to say three things about sugar from your book Metabolical, just to kind of cover that ground. And then I'd love to talk about what you're doing now and where you're taking, where you're spending your time and effort now to try and advance or sort of help us move forward and away from this massive malfunctioning of our food culture.
Okay, well, three things, three takeaways. I guess the first is you can't fix healthcare until you fix health. You can't fix health until you fix diet. And you can't fix diet until you know what the hell is wrong. And we've been barking up the wrong tree for the last 50 years. And, the books that I've written try to, shall we say, right the ship. The second thing is a calorie is not a calorie. Where those calories come from determine where they go in the body, because it's not about calories. It's about insulin. It's about metabolic health. And then the third thing is that all food is inherently good. It's what we do to the food that's not. Ultimately, ultra-processed food is not food. It's poison. The definition of food is substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. It's a fine definition. Well, it turns out that ultra-processed food is a mitochondrial toxin. It actually inhibits energy burning and it inhibits growth. So if you inhibit both growth and burning, you're not a food. And if we thought about ultra-processed food in this, new frame, okay, we would realize that our entire food supply needs to be re-engineered, overhauled, and basically, sort of back to the future. And my goal is to bring real food back to the future.
Right. And how did you get started on this path?
Totally through the back door. It's not like I came with an agenda. Now, I did major in nutrition and food science in college at MIT. So I did sort of learn this stuff early on in college. And then I went to medical school and they beat it out of me. And they basically told me none of this was important, that this was all irrelevant, that basically it was about calories, and it was about eating too much and exercising too little. And, that chronic disease was progressive and non-reversible and just a normal part of aging. And I believed it, I basically said, hey, these are the gurus. These are the, guys who, take care of the patients. This is why I'm paying a hefty medical school tuition, is to learn this stuff. And so I just adopted it. But, I always had this thing in the back of my head from college saying, that's not what I learned. And so I practiced for the first 20 years with this, shall we say, medical school notion that it's about calories, and none of my patients got better. And then I started doing research. I moved to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a neuroendocrinologist, and sort of the bread and butter of my practice was kids with brain tumors who had hormone problems because of hypothalamic pituitary dysfunction. And when I got to St. Jude, I had realized that I had inherited about 40 patients who had survived their brain tumor, through surgery or radiation or chemotherapy, only to become massively obese as a consequence of the therapy. Now, this form of obesity has been known for over 100 years. It was first identified in 1901 by Babinski and Freilich. It's called hypothalamic obesity. And, we know that this is a biochemical / neuroanatomic cause of obesity, but it's rare. I had a whole bunch of these kids, and I had to do something for them. And so what I did was I went to the literature, and I realized that, hey, you can make a lesion in a rat brain that does the same thing, and these animals will eat like there's no tomorrow. But if you keep their insulin from going up by cutting the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is a nerve that leads from the hypothalamus to the pancreas, then they won't. So it became, I'm not a surgeon, I can't cut a vagus nerve, but I could suppress insulin. And so I used a medicine that suppresses insulin. It's called octreotide. We did a study where we took 8 of these kids and we put them on octreotide for 6 months. And lo and behold, they started losing weight. These were kids who could not lose weight. They only gained weight. They gained massive amounts of weight, and they felt lousy. They had no energy. They sat like lumps on a log. The parents would complain to me that this is double jeopardy. My kids survived the tumor only to succumb to the therapy. And lo and behold, we put them on this medicine, and they started being active. One kid became a competitive swimmer. 2 kids started lifting weights at home. 1 kid became the manager of his high school basketball team, running around collecting all the basketballs. These were kids who had no interest in life. And all of a sudden, the parents were saying, hey, I got my kid back. And the kids would say, this is the first time my head hasn't been in the clouds since the tumor. This was very, very important. And so we ended up doing a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And this time we built a quality of life questionnaire into the protocol. And we realized that if we got the insulin down, not only did these patients lose weight, but they felt better and they were more physically active. And then we measured their resting energy expenditure and showed that their resting energy expenditure actually improved. So what this was telling me was that obesity is not because you eat too much, you exercise too little. What it was telling me is that your brain thinks you're starving, and it forces you to eat too much and exercise too little. And when your brain doesn't think it's starving, you can change your behavior. And that brain starvation was a function of the brain lesion. But what we learned is that it's a function of the biochemistry of the fat cell. It's the phenomenon called leptin resistance. And I could fix leptin resistance by getting the insulin down. That insulin blocks leptin signaling. And so I changed my entire method of practice. I changed my entire clinic from a weight loss clinic to an insulin reduction clinic. Get the insulin down any way you can. And guess what? My patients started getting better. And so I have been doing research and promulgating this notion ever since. And I'm doing my best to try to get it adopted as a standard mode of practice amongst physicians and amongst the public. But as you know, it's really hard to turn an aircraft carrier around.
Wow. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking if you could give a pill to these kids to reduce their insulin, why are you not the world's most wealthy man and patent that?
Well, it turns out that, first of all, it wasn't a pill, it was a shot. It was an expensive shot, and it had side effects to boot. And it only worked in the patients who over-released insulin at the level of the pancreas. It didn't work for the patients who were insulin resistant, which was the majority. We actually tried to patent that, use patent for that medicine for obesity, and the patent office turned it down because they said there was prior art. So that's one of the reasons I'm not a rich man. But it turns out that it is the insulin, but there are different reasons for the insulin being high. So in these kids, it was because the pancreas over-released insulin because the vagus nerve told the pancreas to do so. But the majority of people, that wasn't the reason. In the majority of people, the reason was because the liver was sick. And when the liver is sick, then your pancreas has to make extra insulin to basically make the liver do its job. Okay, it's like if you have an assembly line and you have workers who are, that are slow walking, or basically slacking off. Okay, basically you have to push those workers harder or add more workers. And if those workers are also slackers, you're never going to get anything done. And that's kind of what happens between the pancreas and the liver. And what that does is it burns out the pancreas, and then you end up with type 2 diabetes. So the question then is, well, what's wrong with the liver? And that, Florence, is where I came to sugar. Okay. Initially, I thought the problem was insulin, and it is. But then I realized, well, insulin could be high for different reasons. And the primary reason that insulin is high is because the liver's sick, and the liver's sick because of sugar, because of the way the fructose molecule, the sweet molecule in sugar, is metabolized in the liver. And that is what's driving that mitochondrial dysfunction. That's what's driving that insulin resistance. That's what's driving the hyperinsulinemia. That's what's driving the feeling lousy and feeling hungry. And when you fix that, everything reverses. So the main thing is get your mitochondria working. But you can't do that if your mitochondria are being poisoned.
And how can fructose, that beautiful, sweet molecule in all these wonderfully abundant, healthy, nutritious fruits, possibly be that diabolical?
Well, so the question is, when you consume a piece of fruit, is the fructose for you? Every piece of fruit has some sugar. That's why it's fruit, except for like avocados don't have much sugar in them. Okay. But tomatoes do. And, other shall we say, sweet vegetables still have sugar. But they also have a requisite amount of fiber. And fiber is sort of the missing link to this whole story. Fiber is the stealth nutrient. Now, people think fiber is what you throw in the garbage after you juice the fruit. Couldn't be further from the truth. Okay. Fiber makes what you eat available to your bacteria in your intestine, to the microbiome. Now, each of us has 10 trillion cells, but you have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. So your bacteria outnumber you 10 to 1. Now, they got to eat something. Well, what do they eat? Question is, well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? When you consume a piece of fruit that has fructose, sure, but it also has fiber, what happens is that the fiber, and there are two kinds of fiber in each piece of fruit. There's soluble and insoluble, and they're both important. You need both. The insoluble fiber, like cellulose, like the stringy stuff in celery, forms a fishnet or a lattice work on the inside of your intestine. The soluble fiber, like the pectins and the inulin, like what holds jelly together, plug the holes in that lattice work so that together they form a barrier, a secondary barrier. You can actually see it on electron microscopy, a whitish gel that forms on the inside of the intestine. And what that does is that limits the absorption of glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches, so that they don't get absorbed, so that they don't end up in the liver, so that they don't overwhelm the mitochondria, so you don't end up with mitochondrial dysfunction, so your liver can stay healthy. You don't get the glucose rise, therefore you don't get the insulin rise. Therefore, you don't antagonize your leptin. Therefore, your brain knows you've eaten. If you don't absorb those glucose fructose molecules, they go further down the intestine. And what happens to them there? The microbiome chews them up for its purposes. So even though you consumed it, even though it passed your lips, even though it registered as a calorie eaten, if it didn't become a calorie absorbed, then it really wasn't a calorie, was it? It was a calorie for your microbiome, not a calorie for you. So basically, the fiber in the fruit redirects all that carbohydrate, keeping it away from the liver and toward the microbiome, who really want to chew it up. That's their food. That's the food for them. And you have to feed your bacteria, because if you don't feed your bacteria will feed on you. It will actually strip the mucin layer right off your intestinal epithelial cells, denuding them and actually putting you at risk for leaky gut, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, possibly systemic inflammation, and possibly even psychiatric disturbances. So you got to feed your gut. You got to protect your liver. You got to feed your gut. Fiber does both. Protects your liver because of the gel, feeds your gut because you didn't absorb it early, so the bacteria can get it late. So real fruit is fine. But as soon as you stick it in the Breville or the Vitamix, you've destroyed the insoluble fiber. You can't set up that gel. You're going to flood your liver. You're going to overwhelm your gut. And basically, you're still going to lead to chronic metabolic disease. And that's what the data show. The data show that whole fruit reduces your risk for obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. I agree with that. That's why fruit is healthy. But fruit juice actually contributes to obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes because you're missing the fiber.
So those of us that have our green smoothies.
Well, so green smoothies don't have that much sugar because they're green. All right. Those are vegetables. So vegetables are not high in sugar. They're not particularly sweet. Right. I mean, string beans don't have a lot of sugar in them. Okay. On the other hand, there are some vegetables that are much higher in sugar, like squash. Okay. Point is, if you are drinking a green smoothie, there's not that much to protect the liver from. in which case then the fiber becomes somewhat ancillary, not nearly as important. So if you want to drink a green smoothie, have at it. But most people are not drinking green smoothies, they're drinking fruit smoothies. Okay. And that's a very different story because now you've got a huge fructose load.
And there are foods that don't necessarily have any fructose, or why is it fructose, not fructose?
They're both correct.
Okay, good. All right.
I just learned it as fructose.
Okay.
Okay. And then I used it to make a joke in my book, Fat Chance. I said, we've been frucked.
Okay. All right. I'll remember that. So
but they're both correct. I mean, if you go to the dictionary, they're both correct.
Okay. They're both correct. Okay. So, there's foods that are higher, sort of more glucose, or like the grains and stuff are lower fructose and more like just glucose. So does that suggest that really the molecule that we most need to be concerned about is the fructose or fructose, and that we should be less concerned about the grains that are turned into powders? Because that's certainly part of the processed food problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So fructose is its own problem, but refined carbohydrate is also a problem. Mm. So refined carbohydrate is a problem because you also can't set up that gel because the fiber has been removed. So you're still going to flood the liver. Now, you will flood the liver with glucose rather than with fructose. That's true. But what will happen is you will overwhelm the liver's capacity to metabolize it. It will end up raising your serum glucose since your liver couldn't clear it. And that will then make your pancreas have to make extra insulin to clear it. And that will drive weight gain. So refined carbohydrate also drives weight gain. And then when you've gained enough weight, then the fat cells start breaking down because they can't store any more. And that's when the macrophages start cleaning up the grease, and then they start releasing inflammatory cytokines. And now you've got insulin resistance too. So you can have insulin resistance because of a liver problem, which fructose will cause, or you can have insulin resistance because of obesity driving inflammatory cytokines, which is a refined carbohydrate problem. So the bottom line is they're both bad, and they both raise your insulin. And so real food is unrefined carbohydrate. Real food is low fructose. Real food is high fiber. And those are the rules. Those are the things that you need to do. Real food works. Processed food doesn't. Refined carbohydrate is just another processed food. Now, the other thing you need to know about carbohydrate refining, which is not immediately obvious, is that let's take a wheat kernel. Okay, here's a wheat kernel right here, a wheat berry, if you will. All right. It's got three parts. It's got the starch called the endosperm. It's got nucleic acids here in the germ, the wheat germ. And then it's got the covering, the husk, the fiber. Now, the fiber is 25% of the weight of that kernel. 25%. That's a lot of fiber. Now, when you process it, you take that off, it's gone. And the germ, where the nucleic acids are, the polyphenols, the flavonoids, all the things that made that grain worth eating are also gone. They take that away too. And the reason they take that away is because those nucleic acids, those polyphenols, those flavonoids, they don't taste that good. They're kind of bitter. They don't have a very good taste. And they go rancid really fast. So when you process a grain, you're processing away the single thing that makes that grain worth eating from a nutrition standpoint. The rest of it's just energy. So you don't really want to do that. You want to eat the grain intact. But that, of course, it means unprocessed grain. So is there such a thing as unprocessed grain? The answer is, of course there is. You just don't find it on a grocery shelf. All right. An example, perfect example, bread. So bread, there are several kinds, right? There's grocery store bread. There's bakery bread. And then there's this other kind of bread you can buy in the grocery store, in high-level grocery stores, called German fitness bread, as an example, okay? Mestemacher is one company that makes this, all right? These are three different breads. Let's take the bakery bread first, okay? You buy a loaf of bread at the bakery. How soon before it stales?
Week?
2 days, 3 days maybe, right? You can sort of soften it up again if you put it in the microwave, but it hardens and stales pretty fast. All right. Now you take a grocery store bread. How soon before it stales?
Never?
3 weeks. I mean, eventually, but a lot longer. Now, why is that? Why is the bakery bread stale in 2 days and the grocery bread stale in 3 weeks? They're both bread. Why is that? Answer: sugar's been added to the grocery store bread. Why? The reason is because when the bread bakes, the sugar does not boil off. It stays there, holds on to water. So the bread becomes spongier. It basically, it's why the bread puffs up, and it's why it holds on to water. It's hygroscopic. Okay, it's water retaining, and that's why the bread doesn't stale so fast. Okay, it's a phenomenon in the food science literature called water activity. All right, so grocery bread has sugar in it. Bakery bread doesn't. Well, it turns out that sugar is a problem for that reason. All right. Now, let's take the third kind of bread, the German fitness bread. Now, if you've ever seen it at the store, and I have a picture of it in the book, okay, it's half the size of the grocery store bread. It's still a pound. They're each a pound, but it is, like it looks like a brick is what it looks like. Okay, and it's dense, it's heavy, okay, because it's not fluffy. Right? If you threw this at somebody's head, you'd knock them out. Okay, it's that dense, as opposed to grocery bread. If you threw that at somebody's head, bounce off, and they'd say, "You asshole," All right, but I mean, you could use the damn thing as a weapon, because it's really dense. And when you try to cut it, it falls apart really easy. So it makes a lousy sandwich because it doesn't hold together, because it doesn't have a lot of starch. It doesn't have a lot of gluten available to create that, fluffiness. Right? So it's very good for you. Because it's unrefined carbohydrate. And it's got all that fiber, that 25% fiber. And so it is good for you, as opposed to the grocery store bread, which has had the germ removed, which has had the fiber removed, which is only going to spike your blood glucose and therefore your insulin. And that is bad for you. So you have to know what you're doing. And processing is the problem.
Right. And I can imagine that there's people that are so metabolically damaged and their microbiome is damaged that even that healthy German bread is no longer healthy. That there's probably people listening to this will say, I can't even do that. I can't even do that much.
Well, and I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, this is what's gone wrong with our food supply. I understand why food processing took over. It is, it prevents wastage. It prevents spoilage. It reduces price to some extent because of the, no wastage. But the fact of the matter is, you've taken out things and you've added in things that ultimately are poisonous. So even though the processed food looks cheaper, when you realize the healthcare costs that you're paying to basically mitigate the problems that the processed food cost, it's not cheaper anymore. So people tend to think of these two things as separate silos. You've got your food bill, you've got your doctor bill. Okay. What if you combine the two? Okay. Because really they are the same. Because food is medicine, but you know what? Processed food is poison. So if you keep taking poison and you keep having to go to the doctor, is that a good trade? And the answer is no, it's not. It's not at any level. It's not good at a physical level. It's not good at a social level. It's not good at a medical level. It's not good at a societal level. And it is certainly not good at a wallet level. It's basically a bad deal. And, getting people to recognize that your food bill and your medical bill are really the same thing is, part of what I'm trying to do in fixing the food supply.
Amazing. Right. And I can imagine two thoughts to that. One of them is the environmental. It's a bad idea at the environmental level too.
Indeed.
You think about our oceans are just full of pop bottles and plastic bottles, and every office, every school, every major place, there's these garbage landfills full of wrappers from processed junk food. Like most of the pollution, it seems huge amounts of the pollution are in the production of these foods that poison us and do not nourish us.
Well, that is true. And there's a bigger problem, and that is that we grow corn and soy, and we don't grow anything else. Now, corn and soy actually contribute to degradation of the land. That's why we don't have soil anymore. That's why we have dirt, is because we basically overproduce and overplow. And in order to grow corn and soy in dirt, you have to spray nitrogen fertilizer on it, because the soil doesn't the dirt doesn't even have any nitrogen fixed in it anymore for the plant to be able to access in order to be able to grow. So you have to spray the fertilizer. Well, the problem is the fertilizer gets into the water tables, and that's why we have dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, and also nitrous oxide. So that nitrogen fertilizer becomes nitrous oxide, and nitrous oxide is the worst of all the greenhouse gases. All the effort and attention is paid to methane, but in fact, nitrous oxide is the worst because it has the highest heat trapping capacity and it lasts the longest in the atmosphere. Methane only has a residence time in the atmosphere of 9 years. Nitrous oxide has a residence time of 114 years.
My gosh.
Methane is 25 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxide is 250 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. So getting the nitrous oxide out of the atmosphere is even more essential than taking care of the methane problem. Now, people want to blame the methane, they want to blame the cows for the problem. And I'm not telling you the cows are, good, but they are good in a way because they spread manure, and manure carbon fixes and nitrogen fixes in the soil at the site, which is what you want to do as opposed to spraying it so that it all ends up in the water tables and in your drinking water. So in fact, cows are a better way to spread nitrogen than
chemicals.
Than petroleum chemicals are. So the fact of the matter is, we have the whole farming paradigm upside down. And I understand how it got upside down. It used to be right. And then, we moved stuff off the farm. We moved the cows off the farm and put them in CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations like in Kansas, right? And now the animals are, basically lying in their own manure. And so they would get sick. And so then the cattle ranchers have to inject them with antibiotics to keep them from dying, okay, in order to, get them fatter and get them ready for slaughter. Well, now that antibiotics are in our food supply, okay, and they're killing off our bacteria and then rendering us, more susceptible to leaky gut, irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease because of the antibiotics in the meat that we consume.
Is there science to prove that the antibiotics given to animals is actually in the meat and can actually impact our microbiome? There's science.
Absolutely. There's plenty of science.
Really?
You can look up Martin Blazer from NYU. This is a well-worn topic.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I just think, why wouldn't they just pee it out or something? Or why doesn't it just disappear?
Well, they do pee it out, but the antibiotics still stay in their bloodstream.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So
and it can actually, for real, impact our own microbiome.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that people don't understand, they blame the cows for the methane. Now, yes, cows do make methane. It's true. I don't argue that. They fart it, they burp it. Okay. They do make methane. So do we. We make methane too. In 1968, so 50 years ago, there were more cattle in America than there are today, because meat consumption's actually gone down because the price of meat's gone up and because people think red meat's bad, et cetera. So there's been a reduction in meat's consumption. So we have 20% fewer heads of cattle today than we did 50 years ago. Now, the cattle that existed in America in 1968 produced 14 teragrams of methane. Now, a teragram is that's a lot of methane. Okay, 14. A teragram would be the size of a Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, and so the cattle were making 14 Golden Gate Bridges worth of methane in 1968. Well, today we have 20% fewer cattle, right? But those cattle are making 74 teragrams of methane. So 5 times the amount of methane with fewer cattle. How do you do that?
Because they're feeding them junk and grains and...
No, it's the antibiotics.
Oh.
The antibiotics are killing off the good bacteria in the cow's gut and allowing the methanogens, which are antibiotic resistant, to proliferate. So now basically the cows turned into a methane machine.
Oh my gosh. I thought it was because of the food they were, instead of the grass, they were getting all these corn and soy.
Well, that's not helping. That's making it worse. Yeah. The point is, it's not the cow, it's what we did to the cow.
Right.
So everybody wants to get rid of the cows. Okay. What I think we ought to do is get rid of them.
Right. So when I think about the fact that we're sitting here almost universally around the world, I mean, some countries it's worse, but roughly 60 to 70%, if not more, of the foods in grocery stores are processed or ultra processed. Yep. And it seems to me that you're no longer you're no longer in taking patients as a doctor, correct?
Correct.
Would it be fair to say you're now on a mission to try and help us turn this number back around, to get people back to whole foods and to let them the dignity of choice, which you make a really good point in your metabolic book. Look, I'm not here to espouse any one diet. As long as it's a whole food, figure out if it works for you and move forward. Would you say that you're on a mission now to try and get people to get back to whole foods and to change this whole malfunctioning food culture?
I am trying to mitigate chronic metabolic disease, which is tearing through every healthcare budget in the entire developed and developing world. I'm trying to fix chronic disease by fixing our mitochondria, by fixing our food. Yes, that is my mission, if you will. And I'm willing to do it any which way will work. All right. I'm willing to do it at many different levels. I can do it through research. I can do it through policy. I can do it through consulting. I can do it through helping the plaintiffs bar sue the food industry to fix the food, which we do. I'm working with food industry actors that want to change the metabolic profile of their products. This is, a nascent project, but one that is starting to pick up steam because some consumer packaged goods companies realize they are the problem and they want to be part of the solution. They recognize they have to enter the 21st century. And so they have called upon me to help, consult to try to fix the food supply. Now, is there a way to make processed food healthier? And the answer is yes, there is. Okay, but it requires rethinking the entire food portfolio of these companies, which we are doing in order to try to bring metabolic health into the mainstream and make metabolic health, their watchword, their goal.
Incredible. And you're writing books. Do you ever, and this is a personal question, do you ever at 2:00 in the morning when you're tired think, I don't know how much more I've got in me, or do you ever think about quitting or getting too tired to go on?
No, I don't think about quitting. I think sometimes about scaling certain things back, but what would I do if I quit? This keeps me vital, it keeps me active, and I'm doing every doctor goes into medicine, for purpose. This is, my purpose for better or worse. It's not like this was the purpose I started with, but it's the one that brung me.
It called you. Yeah. And I ask that question because there's days where I think, I don't know if I can go on. This is a hard gig. This is a slow gig. It's a hard gig.
It's very tough. There's lots and lots of detractors lined up, on the other side. People always ask me, who are your detractors? I actually bin them into four groups. I call them the 4 Ds. Okay. The deniers.
Yes.
The dinosaurs, the dilettantes, and the drug addicts.
Wow. All 3 make sense, but who's the dilettantes?
The dilettantes are the people who work, within the food industry and for the food industry, who are basically, sort of doing what Profiting. They can to profit from the issue.
Okay. And then the drug addicts, those of us that are hooked, that are saying, don't take my cookies away. Shut up.
That's right.
That's brilliant. Yes.
So we have a lot of all 4 of those. And so when I recognize that, that's who these people are, that's, that keeps me going too.
Yes, I know. And I just think about all those kids that their childhoods are being robbed, right? Their happy, healthy childhoods where they're running around carefree, enjoying being in a body and loving life. And how many millions and millions will never experience a childhood like that because our food culture is malfunctioning?
Well, I'm a pediatrician. My job is to help children, and I can't think of a better way to help them.
Right. I know before we hit the camera, you're like, you know what, Florence, I can never work with 1 million. I can't work with 1 million kids, but I can touch their lives by doing the work I'm doing now. With all of these different sort of streams. So tell us a bit about the work that you're up to. I understand that the Middle East has called you out there to help them with their diabetes crisis. Is that correct?
So like I mentioned before, an actor, a food industry actor in the Middle East, a consumer packaged goods company in the Middle East, recognizes that they are the problem, not the solution, and they wanted to be the solution. Wow. And so they asked me to convene a scientific advisory team, which I did, to basically rethink their entire portfolio of 176 food product items and how we can make each one metabolically healthier. And we developed a tiers classification, to bring each item, into a better tier by, fixing that which is the problem. And it's not just a substitution. It's a complete overhaul of the process. It's not an easy thing to do. There has to be political will within the company in order to do it. But, when one company does it and shows that they can be profitable doing it, then the next company will do it. And so, then the dominoes start to fall. So it has to start somewhere. And, it's starting in the Middle East.
Incredible. Kudos to them. Awesome. And so great that they reached out to you and said, let's do this. I know Pepsi under the female leader whose name I forget was
Indra Nooyi. Right.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
So here's the problem. Indra Nooyi, very, smart, committed executive, born in Madras, India, which is now Chennai, went to Catholic University in Madras. She became the CEO of the largest food conglomerate in the world. Okay. And she saw that her population, the Indian population, was getting diabetes at a rate higher than anywhere else. And she says, I have to help my population. And so what did she do? She introduced the Good For You line. Now, they always had the Fun For You line, the Pepsi and the Doritos, and the, Better For You line, like Slim Jims, things like that. But she started introducing, like the hummus and the pretzels and the chia seeds and stuff like that. Okay, the Good For You line. And she lost 300 in 1 year. And Wall Street called for her head on a silver platter.
Yes.
Because she, quote, took her eye off the ball.
Yes.
Now, she hired Derek Yak, who was working for the WHO. He was one of the people who was, the original one of the tobacco antagonists. And he brought Derek on board to help her remake Pepsi from the inside. And the fact of the matter is, she couldn't. She couldn't do it. And Derek ended up leaving because they couldn't do it. Derek tried to do the right thing within the company. He was assailed by many for selling out. But the fact of the matter is, he couldn't move the needle, and neither could she. And she was lucky to survive, and bottom line is, you never heard from the Good For You line again. Same thing happened to Denise Morrison at Campbell's Soup. Same thing happened to Emmanuel Faber at Danone. They all lost their jobs.
Wow.
Okay, for trying to do better. So this is a major problem. And, unfortunately, every, food industry company that has to issue Wall Street quarterly reports and, placate its stockholders is going to end up in the same boat. And will probably continue to. The good news about this Middle East venture is that this specific company is privately held. And so They don't have quarterly reports. They don't have stockholders. It's a family-owned and run company. And the family members want this to happen.
Wow. And they're willing. Wow. That's really amazing. Those are superheroes. That's great. Seems to me that when we look back on the tobacco, nicotine debacle, that as doctors are smoking in the hospitals, meeting with their patients and endorsing cigarettes as safe, and there's no evidence to suggest that it's addictive, and the tobacco companies knew that they were addictive, and behind the scenes were manipulating, like they knew.
Right.
And then eventually there's lots of different things, I think, that conspired that brought, smoking rates from 60 to 70% in men, way down. But
right.
One of the big levers, it seems to me, was the fact that they were taken to court and proven that this stuff is addictive.
Absolutely.
And so that's coming, isn't it, for food? We can definitely see the early signs that we can show that food can be processed, ultra processed food can be addictive. Clearly it's harmful. There's no question about that anymore. So what hope do you have that this tactic will work with trying to bring these food companies to justice when they know that they're building, they're choosing profit over people?
Right. So the short answer to that is there are lawsuits already but the lawsuits are for deceptive advertising.
Mm.
That's not actually changing what's in the food. It may just basically changes what they can say on the label.
Right.
Okay. We have to change what's in the food. And for that, we then have to prove culpability. And the problem, of course, is they get to hide behind, well, nobody eats just our food. Maybe they got sick from somebody else's food. So it becomes a very difficult issue. We can specifically show that their product is not healthy. Okay, so they have to remove the word healthy from the outside of the package. That's happening and has happened now several times. And I have been the expert witness on several of these.
Wow.
Yeah, but actually showing harm is a different level of proof that one has to be able to generate, and that's a much higher bar, a harder road. I will tell you that we are looking at this question, but it is a very tough question, and the food industry has a lot of ways to hide behind their philosophy of a calorie is a calorie. That's the thing we have to bust, and I'm doing my best to bust it.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Right. Yeah, it drives me crazy when I hear things like Cheerios are part of a Heart Smart breakfast. Really? In what world is that? In what universe is that true?
But again, that's just advertising and labeling. That's not changing.
Yes, I understand.
Cheerios.
Right. But people fall for it. So if they're no longer looking at that product as healthy and they're like, oh, that's unhealthy, I'm on a health kick here, I really want to get the foods that will help my heart. At least at the consumer level, there might be less of this delusion or denial and illusion and misinformation that guides their choices. Oh, what a battle. Thank you for being at the front of it and being tireless about it. And
it's my job.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Is there anything, maybe I'll just ask you the usual, is there anything else you would like to add on this topic of the food culture malfunction and how, reducing and eliminating our consumption of ultra processed foods is important and necessary and whatever?
Well, what I would say is that people, it starts with the individual. Okay. One thing I have learned about the food industry is that if no one buys it, they won't sell it. But as long as someone will buy it, they will sell it. So educating the public is step one. You can't do anything till the public's educated. And by the way, the judges are educated and the politicians are educated, but you have to educate the public. And we're still in that space. What I can say is that the public is getting educated slowly but surely, and the food industry actually proved that themselves. The International Food Information Council, IFIC, which is a public relations arm of the food industry, they publish a yearly report. And every year they ask the general public a question. In 2011, they asked the question, what food or ingredient is most likely to cause weight gain? Only 11% of people said sugar or refined carbohydrate. 42% said a calorie is a calorie or I don't know. They asked the exact same question 7 years later in 2018. Now, 33% of respondents say sugar and refined carbohydrate. And the exact same number of people who said calories a calorie or I don't know went down by just as much. So that means that we are educating people from this notion of a calorie is a calorie to the fact that specific foods have specific effects. So the food industry has actually proven to me that this message is getting out. But we still have a very long way to go. Like I said, it takes a long time to turn an aircraft carrier around.
Mm-hmm. And it'll be exciting as we approach that tipping point. Maybe 5 years from now, it'll be 75% will get it.
Maybe.
You just never know. At a certain point, it just sort of catches on. Well, thank you so much. And I think that anyone who is a heartbeat, is a human being, should really, really understand that letting these companies off, making profit at the expense of people. It's not cool anywhere, at any time. And slowly as we awaken, we're going to start holding everybody accountable to the policies in their schools, in hospitals, and daycares, and like everywhere public, because we need to care about each other enough. We cared about each other enough during COVID. We did.
I don't know that we did. I don't know that we did, to be honest with you. The bottom line is obesity is nobody's fault.
Right.
Okay. It's no individual's fault. No one chooses to be obese. Certainly not obese 6-month-olds, not obese newborns. Okay.
Right.
They don't choose to be obese. They are the exception that proves the rule. Okay. This is not a behavioral issue. This is a biochemical issue. And if my research over the last 25 years has proven to me time and time and time again, behavior is biochemistry. When you understand the biochemistry, then you can influence the behavior. That's my job.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, your work, Dr. Lustig. Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for tuning in today.